Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:16 p.m. in, yes, you guessed it, a very dark, gray, grim, sunless, bleak Budapest. The sun is, of course, just a distant memory. So when you get to the stage of, what is it, February the 5th today, then you really haven't seen the sun, probably since about October. That was probably about the last time I saw it. So I kind of don't even know what it looks like. But anyway, on that gloomy note, well, welcome everybody who has joined me for the Thursday night live. I said live stream. Thursday night live stream. So thank you everybody who's joined me. I see Ahmadovich asks me, George, do you recall the UK Prime Minister apologizing so pathetically like Starmer did over Mandelson? I think he should resign and distance himself better. I was thinking about that today, that, you can only apologize for something that you have done. I mean, if you haven't done anything to apologize, well, then there's something really abject and pathetic and phony about apologizing. So when he starts apologizing to the victims, we don't even know who the victims of Epstein were, because as I've said before, and I know I get a lot of flack for this. Women who were in their 20s when they came into Epstein's orbit and who are now presenting themselves as victims are not in any way victims. And even worse, when CNN and plenty of other media outlets describe them as, quote, survivors, unquote. They're survivors, like Holocaust survivors. They went through this great ordeal, rather than what is obviously the case, which is that young women are obviously trying to make it in New York or in Palm Beach or wherever, and they naturally gravitated to rich men. This kind of thing young women, young ambitious women have been doing forever. So they obviously, with Epstein, who was very generous, and they introduced them to all sorts of rich, important, powerful, influential people. He introduced them to them, and then left it to them to see what they can make of that. Whether they get lucrative careers or whatever. But they're not victims. So Starmer in Parliament today did this whole I apologize. Well, what does he have to apologize for? He had nothing to do with any of that. Now, he can certainly apologize for the bad judgment that he demonstrated in hiring Mandelson as U.S. ambassador, or UK ambassador to the United States, because that was indeed very, very strange. Because, as we know, Mandelson had already resigned twice in disgrace, and it wasn't at all obvious what he had done to qualify to be UK ambassador. He didn't do the job badly, incidentally. He got on rather well with Trump, and in fact, certainly was actually a much more successful UK ambassador to the United States than that guy who was, I can't remember who. I think Boris Johnson hired him. He was the one who was sending out all these messages about Trump, and what an idiot Trump was, and what a ridiculous embarrassment and whatever. So when these messages of his were published by the Daily Mail, then he was a little bit of an embarrassment, and he had to be withdrawn from Washington. I forget the man's name. This was during Trump's first term. So Mandelson wasn't in any way like that. So Mandelson was obviously an improvement on previous ambassadors. He was certainly also better than the Australian ambassador, who also said all sorts of very nasty things about Trump, but he too had to be withdrawn. So Mandelson did okay, and but yeah, there are obvious questions as to um, why Mandelson uh, was appointed to this position, given that his relationship to Epstein was known. I mean, this wasn't in any way a mystery that that Starmer didn't know about it. Of course, he knew. And in fact, there's nothing here when Starmer says, "Oh, he lied to me," whatever. I don't. What did he lie about? I don't know. It isn't clear. Um, and he certainly had nothing to do with any. Obviously, since Mandelson was gay, he had nothing to do with Epstein's whatever, sexual shenanigans. So it was. So again, there was no real reason for Starmer to apologize. Um, and some Peter Kovic says, "What do you think about Chomsky's relationship with Epstein?" It's very hard to know. I'm not exactly sure um, what the basis of this was. I mean, I know he gave financial advice. He may well have. I mean, we don't know yet. I mean, he may well have offered money for Chomsky's work. Um, Chomsky, from what one can gather, um, considered that he Epstein had paid his debt to society by pleading guilty and in Florida, serving time. Then once you've paid your debt to society, you should be allowed to return to normal. I mean, it's like that's the process of rehabilitation. Is that okay? You shouldn't really be punished forever. It's not a life of punishment. You did something wrong. You pleaded guilty. You served time, and then now is it you 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 get on with your life, and so that's why Chomsky refused to distance himself or condemn Epstein. He said, "Well, okay, why should I? He's already done time. He's already you know paid for his crimes. He should now be allowed to get on with the rest of his life." And that's not, I think that's certainly a reasonable position. So that's part of it. Now, but as I say, there may be aspects of it that we don't yet know. I mean, it's clear that Epstein was quite generous with his money. He gave money to people, gave Mandelson money, and he gave just all sorts of people money. He gave money to Harvard. He was throwing money around. That's how he lubricated the the social network that he was involved in. I mean, and that's how rich people acquire networks, and that's how the rich people get to hang out with other rich people or important people or famous people. Buy money. You throw money around. You buy people first class airline tickets. Buy them hotel accommodation. All sorts of things. And of course, yeah, Epstein also knew that the way you can lubricate the social networks is through having a bevy of beautiful babes. They always have to get the alliteration right. You've got to, whenever you're doing popular popular newspapers. The bevy of bounteous, beautiful babes, and that's what Epstein did. And so it's very very amusing with all the talk about how he had to have had help from the FSB or the KGB to get all these Russian women. Allegedly, he got all these Russian women out and brought them to the United States. No, no, um, rich people know how to get lots and lots of beautiful young women, and then use them as a way of spreading his influence with other people. He figured out, and it's not really hard to figure out that why would people want to come to your house and to your parties and to hang out with you? Unless one of them is obviously one of the reasons is obviously if you're generous and you're throwing around money. Another reason is there's always lots and lots of beautiful women at his house, and that people have described that whenever I was at Epstein's house, there were always lots of beautiful young women there. So that was part of his network, that he was always bringing these, there would always be lots of women there. And then presumably he was quite generous with them. There's every indication that, other than sort of introducing them to other rich and famous people, he was also, paying for their courses. Let's say if they want to go into real estate, hey, I want to get a real estate certificate. He would pay for those kinds of courses. Pay for signing up for some culinary course. To become a chef and whatever. He would be quite generous with these sort of payments. But the point was that he figured out that, well, how do you get to be popular? Well, you get to be popular because there's always lots and lots of beautiful young women around you. And Trump himself has always figured that's a key to becoming successful and popular. How do you sell real estate? Well, you have beautiful realtors, who show these rich clients around. That's what how do you sell merchandise? Well, yeah, by having lots of beautiful women to sell the merchandise. So there's no mystery there. As we discussed on Tuesday, there's no mystery to Epstein. He's a type. He's a familiar type. There are plenty of them in New York, or plenty of them really in anywhere in the world where there's lots of money. Because where there's lots of money, there's going to be lots of people hanging around, lots of young women hanging around, and so that then you kind of facilitate the network, and that's what he did. It's not at all mysterious what he did. It's not the only reason why we're talking about it is that the conviction almost 20 years ago in Florida, and somehow people have put two and two together that this was really at the heart of it all, was this underage blackmail sex trafficking ring that he presided over. But in fact, no evidence has ever been presented that he ever presided over this, or there was ever any underage sex trafficking ring. As I said, the truth is much more banal. He spent his time networking. He spent his time writing messages to other grifters like him, for instance, Steve Bannon, and writing to all sorts of important and influential people. Now, going back to Chomsky, he may well, as I say, I don't know, and maybe we'll find out, he may well have offered Chomsky money. I mean, there's lots of people who think, wouldn't it be nice if some rich man came along and offered me some money? I want to do this research. I want to, write a book about, X, but I can't afford it because I have to work, and so I have the daily grind that I have to do. I don't have, I don't have the time. So along comes somebody like Epstein and says, "Well, here's some money. Go right ahead and do your research." So I think he did do some of that, but there's also um, something I don't know about. Chomsky's new wife, and she seems to have been the go-between um, between Epstein and Chomsky. So I don't know exactly what role she played in all of that. So that may have something to do with what was the basis of the relationship. Um, but otherwise, from what one can gather, he he organized all these parties, and these are the parties that Woody Allen would feature in his movies. You have a Chomsky sitting next to a Bannon, kind of right wing populist, left wing intellectual. You would have, a movie producer and a hedge fund manager. He put together all sorts of different people, and then the people thought, hey, well, this is a pretty cool party because I never know who I'm going to meet. It's all sorts of these are all very different characters, and so people I think enjoyed those who of course were invited. They enjoyed it because you never knew who you would want to meet. Um, and so on. Now, someone says about the Israeli intelligence. Now, I do think. I mean, I haven't seen any evidence that he was doing work for intelligence, or he was, and so on. So, but I do think it's entirely plausible that given how much time he devoted to cultivating so many rich and important and influential people, given that the intelligence agencies of a number of countries would want to befriend him. They would want to learn from him because he sits there. He hears a lot of gossip from everywhere, gossip from finance, gossip from the movie business, gossip from the administration. So if an intelligence agency, which is in the business of gathering intelligence, that's their job. You have to collect information, and so someone says, did you get a chance to look at the 2 hours of Bannon's interviews of Epstein? I didn't see 2 hours. I only saw um, 15 minutes. I didn't know that 2 hours were available. I always thought that the 15 minutes that I saw was a teaser for this documentary that he was going to make, but he never made that documentary. Um, Bannon never explained why he never made that documentary, but I didn't know that 2 hours had ever been released. So all I saw were the 15 minutes that were simply a teaser for the documentary. Um, Anyway, I noticed though that CNN, which is such a clownish, idiotic organization, they're when they're not trying trying to assure us that the world is going to collapse because of Trump, then it's about Putin. So having been telling us day in day out that the Epstein files are all about Trump, and they will all reveal what an evil, horrible person Trump is and has always been. Then so they've now switched over to the thesis that was propounded by the UK media that it was Putin. Putin, he was that Epstein was working for Putin. So somehow that's the source of the mystery of how he had all this money. Um, That, of course, it's all complete nonsense, and I think we talked about it last time. Cynthia raised a lot of very very good points showing how nonsensical it all was. That's not to say that he Epstein didn't want to somehow get in with the Russians, because the more people that he knows, the more the people that he can suck into his world, then the more the value of an Epstein connection was. I mean, if he was someone who had an in at the Kremlin, then of course he becomes that much more significant player. So of course he would want to uh, get an appointment with Putin. No evidence that he ever got even near to an appointment with Putin, but nonetheless, there are emails when he was talking about appointment with Putin. And of course, what people do when they get this document dump is they do a quick search and they say, look at how many times Putin's name appears. Yeah, what was the context in which Putin's name appears? Yeah, Epstein wanted to, you know, arrange a meeting with Putin, someone close to Putin, and see if he can just become a global player. Um, but as I said on Tuesday, and I don't need to repeat myself, that if he were such an important player, if he was at the center of the all world events, this key figure that made the world hum, how come he couldn't avoid getting indicted in 2019? How come his supposed good friend Trump, he was the president, and yet he was his Justice Department, his old friend Trump's Justice Department, that indicted him? How come he couldn't even get bail after his indictment? How come he couldn't negotiate some deal? How come he couldn't get to Israel? I mean, if he's that big a fish, that as I say, the main event, the main player, um, making the world go around, it was a kind of ignominious ending. So this is going to go on. This is going to go on. This will never end because the story appeals to on so many different levels, that people want to believe that there are rich, powerful men who run everything. They all hang out together. I think on our locals board there was a very good comment by Robert, who I think described very well why the story of Epstein is so appealing, and why I think it feeds into the notion that a handful of very powerful men run everything, and Epstein was really at the center of this. Unfortunately, that isn't really the case. So that's why I read here, the Trilateral Commission. Yeah, that's another one, with the Rockefellers and so on. So there's yeah, there's a long line of these kind of um, these kinds of figures, and then therefore, and that helps explain everything. Well, of course, it's the Pope or the Rockefellers, or, whatever. So that's fine. But anyway, um, the again, the Rothschild is a little different. Yeah, those the Rothschilds, and there's of course the Rothschilds. Yeah, they're obviously always the figures in the scene. But the Trilateral Commission was the brainchild of uh, David Rockefeller. So that was, they get that. So, and yeah, so that was now. Couple of things that I want to mention today. So as you've seen, there's a lot of moaning and groaning and wailing about the end of the, or the supposed end. We don't. I'm not sure. In fact, it is the end. The end of the last of the nuclear arms control agreements, the New START treaty between the United States and Russia. Now, as I've said before, I'll just repeat again. I'm all for arms control agreements. I'm down for them. I'm disappointed when an arms control agreement comes to an end. However, arms control agreements are not in themselves particularly important. Arms control agreements are only useful when they are part of an ongoing détente process. When states want to put aside old rivalries, old animosities, conflicts, and want to develop a much better relationship, then one of the ways that they develop a better relationship is by limiting or reducing their armaments. They say, hey, well, this is evidence of the fact that we definitely want improved relations. We definitely don't want to go to war. And so, just to show to the world that we really don't want to go to war, we will reduce some weapon systems, or we will limit weapon system to a particular arbitrary number. Now, somebody says you must read the Truth Social about New Start from Trump. Now that you mention it, let's just first of all look at that, and then I'll continue. So somebody said that. Let's look at Trump's Truth Social post, and here it is. And so Trump says, the United States is the most powerful country in the world. I completely rebuilt its military in my first term, including new and many refurbished nuclear weapons. I also added Space Force and now continue to rebuild our military at levels never seen before. We are even adding battleships, which are 100 times more powerful than the ones that roamed the seas during World War II. The Iowa, Missouri, Alabama, and others. I have stopped nuclear wars from breaking out across the world between Pakistan and India, Iran and Israel, Russia and Ukraine. Rather than extend New START, a badly negotiated deal by the United States that, aside from everything else, is being grossly violated, we should have our nuclear experts work on a new, improved, and modernized treaty that can last long and into the future. Thank you for your attention to the matter. Now, obviously, the notion that he stopped the nuclear war between Iran and Israel is sort of laughable on its face, because he, alongside Israel, launched an unprovoked attack on Iran, which, according to his new position, or at least the position of his administration, didn't actually get the job done, because Iran still is in possession of enriched uranium, and presumably Iran is still in a position of developing this enriched uranium for its own ends. So you can, and then Russia and Ukraine, and then rather than extend New START, sort of badly negotiated deal by the United States that is being grossly violated. I don't know what he means by being violated. Russia stepped aside in terms of the inspections, but he said he would continue to observe the limits negotiated on the New START. And then, so we're going to work on a new modernized treaty. So we're going to have this new treaty, just as he said we're going to have this. He's always promising something down the road, a new treaty. Like during his first term, he was going to negotiate a new JCPOA, which never happened. Just as he always promised that, we can get rid of Obamacare and then we're going to have something fantastic in its place, but we never really got the fantastic replacement for Obamacare. So instead of New START, we're going to get some really fantastic deal. Now, the just going back to the principle of arms control. They don't in themselves do very much. So therefore, all the people who are wailing and wringing their hands, oh, now we've got we're going to have a horrific arms race. Uh, if we look at the history of arms control agreements, I mean, they really weren't, in themselves particularly significant. I mean, you had the famous one was the Washington Agreement. I think it was pretty much the first arms control agreement that limited the tonnage of the United States, the UK, Japan, France, and Italy. So that was about, I think, 1921, the Washington. And then, I mean, I guess you could say the Geneva Protocol in 1925, when states voluntarily pledged never to use poison gas. I mean, that was that kind of worked. They didn't use poison gas in World War II. I mean, they they used nuclear weapons, but they didn't use poison gas. And then, of course, there was the Anglo-German naval treaty signed with Hitler, incidentally, and the Anglo-German naval treaty was it was a classic kind of arms control agreement limiting German tonnage. I think it was 35% of the tonnage of the Royal Navy. And I guess that worked for a while until it didn't. And why didn't it work? Well, it's not because Hitler didn't abide by the treaty. Hitler did abide by the treaty. It didn't do the job because relations between Great Britain and Germany drastically deteriorated. And though you can argue why they deteriorated, whatever. Then nonetheless they deteriorated. And by April 1939, after Great Britain had issued its ultimatums to Poland, which Hitler obviously took as a hostile act, which of course it was, because any time you issue a guarantee to one side only, then the side against whom it's directed obviously takes that as a hostile act. So the March 1939 guarantee to Poland by Germany, by Great Britain, it was clearly directed against Germany. Germany then took that as a hostile act. So I mean, if you guarantee one side but you don't guarantee the other side, then that's obviously a hostile act. And at that moment, so that was March 1939, and then in April 1939, Germany walked away from the Anglo-German naval treaty. But you can see that the issue wasn't the agreement, one way or the other. The issue was that there was a dramatic deterioration in relations between Great Britain and Germany, and one victim of this deterioration of relations was the Anglo-German naval treaty. And so by itself, it didn't really mean a great deal. So now, if one then looks after World War II, during the great days of détente, which kind of started during the mid 1960s, when they began the negotiations towards SALT, the Strategic Arms Limitation talks. Then that was because relations improved, and so as relations between the United States and Soviet Union kept improving, from the low point. Well, the low point was obviously the immediate post-war years, but then the second low point was the early 1960s, the Berlin crisis, and then the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then things started improving, reaching all the way to the Moscow summit. This was the first visit by any American president to the Soviet Union. I mean, other than FDR's visit to Crimea, Yalta, Crimea, during World War II. But this was Nixon's visit to Moscow, where they signed the the first, I guess, the first post World War II arms control treaty. So we had the arms control treaties between World War One and World War II, but this was the first post post World War II arms control treaty. And everyone was very happy about it. So you had the SALT agreement was signed, and then you had the ABM treaty signed. Everyone was happy about this, but they were happy because there was Nixon and Brezhnev hugging, and thinking this is fantastic. There's going to be peace, and this was and then of course then they began negotiating the next SALT agreement, and they did finally negotiate the SALT II, which was signed. It was Jimmy Carter and Brezhnev, and but then Afghanistan happened, and the Senate never ratified SALT II, even though the limits that were negotiated on the SALT II were observed, but the U.S. never ratified SALT II. Now, but the reason for that was the drastic deterioration of relations between the United States and the Soviet Union, and then there were no more arms control treaties until the Reagan-Gorbachev era, when they signed the INF treaty. And why did they sign the INF treaty? Well, because relations again improved between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. So the point is that it's only because the relations improve that you can have arms control treaties. Arms control treaties come second. So the people who are wailing, moaning, and groaning, particularly these Democrat senators, are completely ridiculous. These are the same senators who are continually calling for sending yet more and more weapons to Ukraine, to be used on Russian territory to kill Russians. These are the same Democratic senators who are complaining that Trump isn't doing more to punish Russia. The same Democrat senators who kind of cheer on the most dangerous, most reckless possible policies against Russia. And then they, well, arms control treaty. We have arms control. How can you even think about arms control treaties when you are attacking Russian bomber fleet that's out in the open in accordance with the New START treaty? They maintain them out in the open so that satellites can see them. So you attack the bomber fleet. You attempt to assassinate twice, at least. It seems like Ukraine tried to assassinate Putin with U.S. support. It has to be with U.S. support. So that's fine. That's fine. Nothing dangerous there. But letting an arms control agreement lapse, oh my God, that's really reckless. This is prime liberal idiocy. This is absolute liberal idiocy. Who they've since forever made a complete fetish of arms control, never appreciating that our arms control come second. It's the actual substance of the relations that comes first, is whether you have a genuine partnership, whether you're working towards cooperation, and that you're working towards avoiding conflict, you're working towards peaceful relations. You can't have arms control when you're trying to provoke a war. So the Democrats and the sort of liberals and editorial writers and whatnot, they want to provoke a war with Russia, and then they say, whoa, what about arms control? We've got to sign an arms control treaty. How are you going to sign an arms control treaty when you're at war? So this is the thing. They want to have this war, but somehow you're going to have a war while you're signing an arms control treaty. That's never happened. No one's ever done that. And this is why this is so idiotic. Now, 1935, as I said, Anglo-German naval treaty. At that time, Hitler was seen to be quite, a useful partner to the Western powers. So why not sign the Anglo-German naval treaty? I mean, Germany agrees that its tonnage would just be 35% of the tonnage of the Royal Navy. Relations were improving between Germany and the United Kingdom, and both Great Britain and Germany agreed we don't want to get back to the situation we had before World War One, where Germany was building its navy and the British were looking with great alarm at the growth of the German navy, and they said, well, we don't want to do that, so we're not going to have a naval race. We'll agree on limitations. Now, of course, once relations deteriorated by 1939, then the Anglo-German naval treaty was moot, as of course is the case. But how can you have a war with Russia, or essentially provoking a war with Russia, doing the most reckless thing? No one in the Cold War would have imagined doing anything as reckless as hitting Russia's strategic bombers, as trying to assassinate Putin. No one would have dreamt of doing anything like that. But but then at the time there was still, however, well, we can work out on arms control treaties. We said, oh, we got to, where's our arms control treaty? This is very, very dangerous. We can't have a nuclear arms race. Well, a nuclear arms race is not in itself dangerous. Bombing Russian territory, that is dangerous. That's dangerous. That's kind of reckless. When you bomb the territory of a nuclear power, that's dangerous. But a nuclear arms race is not dangerous in itself. But anyway, here is the New York Times. This is Trump's truth. And then so now, well, this is I wanted to mention this. It looks at moment. I mean, from that truth, it seemed like Trump wasn't interested in renewing the New Start, or even to do what Putin proposed. Well, let's just maintain the limits on the New Start. We won't necessarily negotiate a new treaty. We won't renew the treaty. We'll just observe the limits that we had agreed upon in 2010. So that was what the Russians proposed. Trump didn't even agree to that. But now it seems, at least what Axios says, is that, well, maybe they will agree to maintain the limits on the New Start. And so here is the Axios story. The U.S. and Russia are closing in on a deal to continue to observe the expiring New Start arms control treaty beyond its expiration. On Thursday, three sources familiar with the talks tell Axios. Two of the sources cautioned that the draft plan still needed approval from both presidents. An additional source confirmed that negotiations had been taking place over the past 24 hours in Abu Dhabi, but an agreement had not been reached. And then the New Start is the last major. And then here we are. Yeah. And then the treaty will still formally expire on Thursday, and the extension will not be legally formalized. And then a U.S. official is quoted here saying, "We agreed with Russia to operate in good faith and to start a discussion about ways it could be updated." Another source said that the practical implications were that both sides would agree to observe the deal's terms for at least 6 months, during which time negotiations on a potential new deal would take place. Well, good luck with a new deal. Trump posted on Truth Social, so we talked about that. And And then here we have the U.S. European Command announced the resumption of military dialogue with Russia on Thursday. It was suspended in 2021 in the lead up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And then the New START caps the number of nuclear warheads the U.S. and Russia can deploy on submarines, missiles, and bombers. And then it acknowledges, of course, that Russian President Putin had previously suggested a short-term extension, but the Russian foreign minister lamented in a highly critical statement on Wednesday that our ideas have been deliberately left unanswered. Well, there's nothing new about that. And then the primary reason the White House was skeptical of extending New START is that it doesn't constrain China, which has a much smaller but rapidly advancing arsenal. Obviously, the president's been clear, this is Rubio now being quoted, that in order to have true arms control in the 21st century, it's impossible to do something that doesn't include China because of their vast and rapidly growing stockpile. That's Rubio. Beijing has shown no interest in joining an agreement that would limit its nuclear program and has little clear incentive to do so. Some experts think trilateral arms control won't work given the disparity in current arsenal and so on. And then while the U.S. and Russia negotiated agreed to observe the spirit of New START, the parties have not formally signed an agreement to that effect. And then one U.S. official cautioned that the agreement would have to be a handshake deal because an extension is technically not permissible by law. And then anyway, so that's anyways. Now, a couple of things about that. There's nothing unreasonable, I think, in insisting that China be included in any nuclear arms negotiations. I think that, I mean, as I mentioned in the example before, when you had the Washington Agreement, that included the navies of several powers who were much smaller. So you had the United States Navy, you had the Japanese Navy, you had the United Kingdom Navy, and then you had the navies of France and Italy, who were much smaller. So you can absolutely have other powers, and then when you set limits, everyone has limits. The limits for China would obviously be much less than the limits that would be placed on the United States and Russia. But I think it's absolutely reasonable that China should be included in these talks. I think it's reasonable that the United Kingdom and France should be included in these talks, because the United Kingdom and France are both members of NATO, and however much they may insist that it is an independent nuclear deterrent, it is ours, it is only France, the force de frappe. France, in practical terms, is a member of NATO. And should there be a war between the United States and Russia, France can be expected to join forces with the United States. Same with the United Kingdom. So if you're Russia, you say, the UK and France should be involved in any nuclear talks. I think India and Pakistan should also be included in these talks. And of course, the 800-pound gorilla, which is Israel. Israel should be involved in these talks. But this just shows the disgusting hypocrisy of it all, because Israel is allowed to do something that nobody else is allowed to do, which is that Israel is allowed to have nuclear weapons without ever actually admitting that it has nuclear weapons. Because everyone else, you have the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. They obviously admit that they have nuclear weapons. India and Pakistan have both admitted that they have nuclear weapons. Israel gets away with not admitting that it has nuclear weapons. Israel gets away with by not admitting that it has nuclear weapons. Israel gets away with not disclosing what and how many nuclear weapons it has. So nobody really knows what exactly is Israel's nuclear capability. Everybody else announces what their nuclear capability is. We know what France's nuclear capability is. We know what the UK's new. We know they give you detailed accounting of what nuclear weapons they have. Nobody knows what exactly Israel has, and so Israel gets the prestige of having nuclear weapons, the ability to bully and threaten other powers, but without any of the responsibility of disclosing what you actually have. You know, or even just formally admitting what it is that you have. So Israel, will obviously not take part in any negotiations. But I do think that it's reasonable that all nuclear powers should take part in any nuclear arms control treaties, and using that model of the Washington Treaty. If they figured out at that time what the limitations should be to each power, because you can't have the same limitation for everybody, because obviously one if you have a real major naval power, it's not going to have the same number of ships as a much smaller naval power. So this can all be done. So Trump's demand that China be involved, I think, is a very reasonable demand. But Russia doesn't repeat this, because of course Russia wants to maintain its relations with China. So Russia just doesn't have anything to say. So whenever Putin is asked, well, what do you think of that? About China taking part in nuclear talks. So, well, that's up to China. We don't tell China what to do. So that this so that, that so anyway, the point is that what I was saying, what Trump is thinking, is not unreasonable, but there's something ridiculous about the the hysteria about the no arms control agreements. I think there is every reason to be hysterical about attacks on Russia on Russian territory. No one's ever done that since World War II. But during World War II, Russia was not a nuclear power. You're now attacking a nuclear power, and you're not just attacking a nuclear power in the way that, let's say, okay, Ukraine, we'll let Ukraine attack us. Okay, fine. Ukraine's not a nuclear power. Ukraine can attack us. We'll let it go. Ukraine is only attacking Russia because the United States enables Ukraine to attack Russia. So it's the United States that is effectively attacking Russian territory. This is being cheered on, greeted excitedly by all of those creatures in Washington, all of those Pocahontas and the rest of them, who are now wailing about, this. There are no more nuclear arms control treaties. What are we going to do? The world has become so dangerous. Oh, so hitting attacking Russia's strategic bombers by the United States, since it's the United States, that's not dangerous. But no arms control treaty. Oh no. Anyway, here's the New York Times. It's always a classic. Nuclear arms control era comes to an end amid global rush for new weapons. So it's come to an end, the era. And here's on Thursday, the last nuclear arms control treaty between the United States and Russia expired. For the first time since 1972, it leaves both superpowers with no limits on the size or structure of their arsenals. At the very moment, both are planning new generations of nuclear weapons and newly evasive means of delivering the deadly warheads. All right. And then arms control was not supposed to end this way. When President Nixon signed the first arms limitations treaty with the Soviet Union, the banner headlines signaled a new era in which even the most hostile of Cold War rivals saw the danger of letting the arms race spin out of control. No, 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 no. It wasn't an arms race. The reason why the Cold War got dangerous is that it got dangerous. That they were not because of the nuclear weapons. In fact, no one really thought that it was likely to be used nuclear weapons, but it was getting to be the point was that they're going to start shooting at one another. The Cuban Missile Crisis, and that's what was dangerous. Not because who has how many nuclear weapons, but after the Cuban Missile Crisis, after the fear that this induced. I mean, people got really scared during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That suddenly, both the United States and the Soviet Union said, "Well, we don't want to go through this again, and we need to really start cooperating." And then you had the sort of the détente, which started immediately after the resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that led to the opening of that was 62, 1968, the opening of the strategic arms limitation talks, and then that's 1968, and then 1972 they finally signed the SALT Treaty. But the whole story about the arms race that goes back to after World War One, where people tried to make sense of how the hell did this happen? Why would the most advanced civilized states in the world, they're obviously they're the most scientific, they have the most advanced political systems, the most advanced education systems. That's why they were the imperial powers. They got to rule over the rest of the world because they were so advanced. How come the most advanced countries in the world got themselves into trying to destroy one another? And so the theory came about that, well, the reason for this was the arms race. It was arms race that was out of control, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. It was just the arms race, arms just spiraling out of control, and then boom, they started killing each other. It was a ridiculous explanation. But ever since then, it's become this the liberal shibboleth of the arms race. We have to, that's what leads to wars. It's arms races that cause wars. Anyway, so this is the Times. And then he goes on, already there are signs that the Trump administration is planning to break out of the numeric limits of the New START treaty. Not dramatically, but in ways that could easily trigger a new arms race. Along the way, they will make the most deadly element of the American arsenal even more deadly. And then they talk about the Ohio-class submarines and so on, and how they're going to start breaking through the limits of that. And so it goes on. And this is very funny. This is the Times, really without batting an eye, says Monica Duffy Toft, director of the Center for Strategic Studies at Tufts University, noted recently that when one state tries to increase its security, others often feel less secure and respond in ways that leave everyone worse off. Arms control agreements, she added, emerged precisely to dampen this dynamic. Now, the point about when you read this passage, Times kind of quotes this, obviously approvingly. What is she saying here? She's saying when one state tries to increase its security, others often feel less secure and respond in ways that leave everyone worse off. Now, what does that remind you of? What does that remind you of? Gee, that reminds you of NATO expansion. That's exactly what the Russians have been saying for years. That you by insisting on NATO security, unilaterally insisting on NATO security and not concerning itself with the security of anyone else, you leave everyone worse off because you leave someone else insecure. And the Russians repeatedly, up to the point of tedium, they repeat security is indivisible. It's become a little bit of a tired you know, storyline now because nobody really knows what they mean. But that's exactly what they said. Yeah, if you insist on your security, expanding NATO, and you don't pay any attention to our security, then you leave everyone worse off because then we become very insecure because we've got NATO all around us, surrounding us, and you may feel secure. We don't feel secure. We've got NATO wherever we look. We're surrounded by NATO. So here's the Times that just simply is oblivious as it quotes this woman who says exactly what the Russians have been saying for years and years and years, the very things that the New York Times has repeatedly dismissed and scorned for. Or Putin just wants to restore the Soviet Union and all this kind of nonsense. But it said, yeah, if you insist on your security and don't pay any attention to my security, then of course everybody gets worse off. And so so that's completely, the New York Times just totally, lacking any self-awareness. Others feel less secure and respond in ways that leave everyone worse off. Yes. But you see, you're allowed to say these things because of arms control. The arms control is this. It just hangs there, like a chandelier. It doesn't have any connection with anything else. It's this esoteric realm that the people talk about and wring their hands over and anguish over. Oh, arms control, and not really seeing arms control as integral part of geopolitical rivalry. So that's why she can get away with saying things like that, which is entirely, absolutely applicable to NATO expansion. And then it goes on. When New START was negotiated, it covered only strategic weapons, which can be delivered to targets on the other side of the world. But now, China was considered the new small player, and so on. Anyway, so it goes on. Anyway, then here's the Washington Post. Also, this is today. Today is a real day for moaning about arms control. The treaty limiting U.S. and Russian nuclear arms expired. What to know? U.S. lawmakers have expressed concern that the end of New START could lead to a dangerous and costly arms race between the world's biggest nuclear powers. So this is the Democrats, returning to their arms control era of the 1980s. For decades, the world's two largest nuclear arsenals have been constrained by a series of treaties, but that changed Thursday when the last remaining nuclear arms limitation treaty between the United States and Russia, known as New START, expired. Russia said in September it is willing to continue adhering to the central limitations, but the Trump administration has yet officially to respond to the offer. Well, by not saying anything, then that's their response. In October, almost 24 U.S. lawmakers signed a letter urging the Trump administration to accept Putin's offer to continue to adhere to the limits of the treaty after it expires. This, they argued, would allow time to reach a new agreement to help to prevent a dangerous and costly arms race between the United States and Russia. So again, the bizarre aspect of it, that these signatories, most of them, but those who sign these kinds of letters, they all think Russia is the epitome of evil. Putin is Hitler. Nothing Putin says is to be believed. He breaks treaties, he breaks agreements. So according to their logic, we need to sign an agreement with Putin. the very same Putin who you think should be killed, the very same Putin who's a liar, who never keeps his word, who breaks agreements, who's just Hitler, today's Hitler, but we need to sign an agreement with him. I mean, it doesn't. It makes no sense whatsoever. But it's go over because it's about arms control. It's sort of accepted, and you think, and so no one really questions. Well, if that's what you think, if that's your view of Russia, if that's your view of Putin, why would you then talk about signing an arms control agreement with him? Why would you think he's going to agree to this? But of course, it doesn't. They don't really think that. They what they're trying to do here is to score some political points at Trump's expense, like they did to a certain extent, but didn't really work that well for them during the 1980s with Reagan. But at least during the 1980s, they did have a certain argument. There was a certain logic to the argument for arms control during the 1980s, because when Reagan announced that the United States would build a shield. This is the shield, the strategic defense initiative, so that the United States would be invulnerable. According to Reagan, that was Reagan's claim. The United States would be invulnerable to a nuclear attack. Well, at least you can then say, well, that is destabilizing. I mean, because up until then, you'd had the notion of this mutual balance of terror, that both sides could essentially destroy one another. And so since both sides could destroy one another, and then no one's going to start a nuclear war. And so that that kind of, they said, okay, the balance of terror kind of creates its own stability. But if you're going to build a shield that can protect you from an attack by the Soviet Union, then essentially you don't have the balance of terror anymore. That means you have a first strike capability. You can strike the Soviet Union in the knowledge that the Soviet Union would not be able to retaliate. Now, that was all, of course, theoretical, and no one really believed that could be the case, but that was still at least the logic of what Reagan was saying, that the United States would have first strike capability. And the logic up until then had been the balance of terror logic, which is that both sides have a second strike capability. You hit the Soviet Union with a first strike, the Soviet Union would still have the second strike capability. They would still be able to hit back and inflict extraordinary damage on the United States, in which case that would act as a deterrent against any first strike. But if you now are supposedly immune from retaliation, then that that creates a temptation for a first strike. And then, of course, if the Soviet Union suspects that the United States is moving towards a first strike capability, then that would induce a certain temptation on the part of the Soviet leaders to hit the United States before the United States becomes invulnerable. So at least that was an argument. You could make that argument in the 1980s that Reagan was destabilizing the nuclear balance between the United States and the Soviet Union. This nonsense on the part of Democrats who want to wage a war against Russia in Ukraine, but then they say, oh, well, we've got to have an arms control agreement. That makes absolutely no sense. So they just sort of, hey, we can going back in time to the 1980s, but that was a very different time, very different era. And we'll just finish off, and then we'll. So that's not blah, 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 the costly arms race. And then we have the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist, and then, Doomsday Clock, 85 seconds of midnight, citing New Start's exploration. Now, again, not the doomsday of, hey, you're fighting a bloody war against Russia. You're bombing Russian territory. You're killing Russians. Americans are helping to kill Russians, and you don't think that's dangerous? citing a new start's expiration and a general dearth. Oh, that's a nice old-fashioned word, dearth, general dearth of leadership on nuclear issues, as part of its reasoning for moving the metaphorical clock 4 seconds closer to global catastrophe. So that's the catastrophe, an arms race. Arms races do not lead to catastrophe. Other things, when you're trying to provoke a war, that can lead to catastrophe, but an arms race in itself does not do that. It called on the U.S. and Russia to adhere to the treaty's central limits, to conduct data exchange. Okay, so anyway, that's then that. Anyway, let's take a look at our locals board, and this is the Gagglers, the people, the members of our community who always try, worry about the condition of the dogs. Worry that the dogs are not appreciated. The dogs are getting depressed. They feel that they're putting in all this work and they're not. No one's rewarding them. So it's always, I always enjoy, I'm very grateful to the Gagglers who worry so much about the state of the dogs, their state of mind, their physical well-being. So really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Gagglers. And Danaki, good to see you, Danaki. So Danaki says, Kedves George, dear George, as day follows night, we guessed correctly once again. It was Estonia that seized a Russian manned container ship bound for St. Petersburg. Yeah. What next? Malta's mighty navy confiscating the sole crippled Russian aircraft carrier. Well, that's exactly the case. The problem has been that Russia has responded very weakly to these seizures of container ships. Now, there are two ways that you can respond. Three ways. First of all, you can actually make clear to the world that you're not going to put up with this. But Russia hasn't done that. Russia's response has been very mute. You could use your navy to accompany container ships, but that really isn't practical because there are so many container ships sailing at any time. You just simply don't have the naval resources to provide an accompaniment all over the world. I mean, Russia just doesn't have the naval resources to do that. So, some tankers are going to be left to fend for themselves. So that's not really feasible. Then what is feasible is, of course, that you can seize other countries' ships, and you can do what's done to the Russians. You can seize a French container ship, seize a British. I mean, the Russians are always talking about the British. How pissed off they are with the British. They just always find the existence of the British particularly irksome. So they can absolutely seize the British ships or any other German ships, Polish ships, Estonian, whatever. They can do that and start doing it on a regular basis, and then see how they like it, see how they respond to that. But Russia hasn't really done that, and so now you have Estonia seizing container ships completely illegally. Completely illegally. The whole idea that this is a shadow fleet and that is violating sanctions, which have no legal basis whatsoever. There are no legal foundation whatsoever. These are EU sanctions, US sanctions. They have no legal basis. They have not been passed by the United Nations Security Council, and so therefore no one is under any obligation to follow these sanctions. So seizing them in the high seas as is completely illegal. Whether they have done that, even even if you're not going to do that, and you claim, oh well, they haven't done the proper paperwork, they're not flying the proper flag, or they're not registered to the right country. That isn't the basis. That is no legal foundation for seizing ships on the high seas. No, absolutely none. There is nothing in the law of the sea treaty that says that any country has the right to go around seizing other ships because they haven't done the proper paperwork. There's none whatsoever. So Russia has allowed this to happen, and now this is becoming a regular thing. And that's always been the point, to do a regular thing and therefore raise fears and concerns and raise the costs to Russia, because given the fears of the ships that they're going to be seized, that's going to raise insurance rates. So you keep, adding to Russia's burden. They're going to have to start paying, much higher insurance rates, since there's always a likelihood that a container ship will be seized on the high seas. So yeah, Russia has not responded, and that's what's going to happen. Now this is this is going to be a regular thing, and it is absolutely going to affect Russia's economy. Say, because obviously they're going to be companies are going to become reluctant to transport oil or anything else if they think there's a possibility that their ships might be seized, and there's the raised insurance rates. So that's what that, you're right. That was entirely predictable that this would happen. So anyway, Denaki goes on. And second, how sharp do you reckon Marco's knives for eyeliner VP Vance already? It was so blatantly evident with the Maduro raid, as little Marco sat next to Trump in the Situation Room while eyeliner was caravanning somewhere in Miami. Well, that's very interesting. And Denaki posted that on our Gaggle board, which, and I strongly urge those who are following this on X and following this on YouTube to please join our locals community, the gaggle.locals.com, because we have so many interesting items constantly being posted on our board. And Denaki posted this story that you know, that, JD Vance was somehow partying and wasn't involved in the meeting in the Situation Room when Maduro was seized and abducted. Marco was there, and John Ratcliffe was there, but JD Vance was missing. Now, having said that, I still think that that JD has the inside track for the nomination for 2028. He has bonded with MAGA. MAGA trusts him. MAGA thinks that he is this kind of right wing populist. He's a non interventionist, or at least much more so than Rubio. I don't think MAGA will ever trust Rubio. I mean, and everything is going on now, whether it's the seizure of Maduro, the threats against Cuba, the threats now against Iran, because it's clear that Rubio is itching for an attack on Iran. So none of that appeals to Trump's base. So that none of that is, but none of that is associated with Vance. So I do think that Rubio is going to have serious difficulties persuading MAGA that he's one of them. As far as MAGA is concerned, he is what he has always been. He's an interventionist. He's kind of a neocon, an Israel firster, absolute, obsessive on issues such as Cuba and Iran and just about everything else, including Russia. There is somebody who was kind of keen to escalate the fight against Russia. So I don't see how Marco can persuade MAGA to support him. So I do think that JD has the inside track unless something happens. So JD has been going along with Trump. I mean, he has to. He has to be the loyal number two. But no one really thinks that this is his policy and that he's wholeheartedly supporting this. Um, so Marco can score points now and during Trump's term, but I don't think that's serving well in 2028. However, I do think though that Marco will probably leave the administration because, to be honest, I kind of feel that Trump is unraveling. I mean, he seems to be all over the place on everything. He's all over the place on Minnesota. Is to anyone else, to any of his supporters, they think that he's backing down. They don't see Waltz and Fry backing down. They see Trump as backing down. And if you're backing down on your signature issues, then you don't really have much of a future. I mean, he's already in effect a lame duck president. I mean, he's only got the one term. He's not going to get another term. So pretty soon, all kinds of people, but especially Rubio, are going to be heading for the exits. That's always happens after just about the midterms. That's the time to start making way for the exits, and particularly if it seems as if Trump is done, and that he's not going to accomplish very much, during his remaining time. So Rubio will exit, and then I think he's going to try and carve himself out as the whether the heir apparent or the man to take over the GOP. This maybe sort of Trump, but not Trump, but a Trump who can get things done. I think that's going to be what he's saying. I'm basically a Trumpian, but I'm smoother. I'm able to get on with the Democrats on Capitol Hill. I can get stuff done that Trump can't. Trump is just too provocative, and so he just can't get enough done. Whereas I can, and I think that's going to be his selling point. As I say, I don't think it'll succeed, but that's what I think. He's going to do after the midterms, because he's going to be. He needs to plan for his run, so he needs to get out around about the midterms. Anyway, thank you, Danaki. Summer Petros, good to see you, Summer Petros. Summer Petros was here in Hungary recently. Bought me a very, very nice gift. You have to appreciate it. A very nice bottle of scotch. I know everyone's going to feel very envious, and you should feel very envious. It was an extremely nice present, an extremely nice scotch. So thank you so much. Anyways, Tom Petra says, George, you and other streamers faced strong competition yesterday. Never like the sound of that. Yesterday, when the House of Commons was the scene of the Epstein files, UK edition, latest detonation. Lord Mandelson, although not present, was the focal point, and condemned escalatorily by all. Every 6 months, he's in the eye of an intense storm, has to resign from one or two things, and then things calm down a bit until the next eruption happens. I agree with you, and I know that in this case, I guess there will be yet another investigation. I mean, they're going to have to investigate these allegations, basically that he had passed on confidential government information to Epstein while he was a government minister. So, there was the story about the taxes on bankers' bonuses that he passed on to Epstein. Then there was the bailout fund for the euro, whatever it was, the 500 billion bailout for euro, that he passed on that information to Epstein. So there's going to be there's going to have to be some kind of an inquiry into that. As I said, notice that none of that has anything to do with the sex. I mean, the only reason we got into the whole Epstein thing was the sex, but none of this has anything to do with sex. This is a complete separate issue. Um, but I tend to agree. I don't think those things with Mandelson, this information that he was passing on to Epstein is going to get anywhere. Then there are not going to be any criminal charges out of that, probably because they'll say this was all in the public space. Everybody knew about this. He wasn't saying anything that was secret, or he wasn't disclosing any confidential information. So I think the inquiry will absolve him. There's not going to be any criminal prosecution. And then, I don't know whether he's going to be back. I mean, I don't think he's ever going to get a political appointment, but I think he'll be rehabilitated, and I think within a few years he will once again be the subject of lengthy interviews in the media. The television cameras are going to visit him in his home in Wiltshire with his husband, and he'll show them around, and he'll show them, what a nice cottage they have, and how he does all this nice cooking and whatever. And that's that. I mean, and then everything will be largely forgiven and forgotten. I mean, the things that were held against him in the past were in themselves quite serious. So at least as serious as anything here. And he'd had to resign, but he seemed to come back. Now, I think he came back because he's just more intelligent than the Blairites. I think he is the inventor of Blairism, and he's the architect of the third way, or the middle way, or whatever it was. And I don't think Blair and Brown were really ever that smart, but Mandelson kind of created that, Blairism, Cool Britannia, and the rest of it. And so that's why they had to get him back, because they had to get back on message, and so that's why he was so important to them. And there's obviously a shortage of talent. There's no question. There's a real shortage of talent in Britain. That's probably why Starmer had to call on him. He didn't really have anyone smart and labor, I guess. I mean, and I guess Starmer is himself the offspring of Blairism. I mean, he's kind of a bit late to the party, but he is, he's still the sort of centrist Labour, the reaction against Corbyn. So he's sort of a Blairite. So he brings back the godfather of Blairism. But that's because there really is a limitation on talent. So you have to keep coming back to Mandelson, because there's no one else. I mean, Angela Rayner. I mean, that's the best you can do. And you look at some of those people on the Labour front bench. I mean, that's a very unimpressive group. So if you want to curry favor with Trump, which is what Starmer wanted to do, you can see why he decided that Mandelson would be a pretty good bet. And as I say, he did the job well. Trump got to rather like him. Trump wouldn't have got on with some of the other kind of labor creatures that he goes send. Imagine Starmer sending someone like Angela Rayner as ambassador to Washington. That it wouldn't have worked at all. So you could see what Starmer was doing, but Starmer's performance today, as I was saying earlier, was quite pathetic. The one other aspect of it, which I think is quite interesting, is how Blair's reform, I mean, one of Blair's signature policies was the reform of the House of Lords, and how this new House of Lords is far more corrupt, far sleazier than the old House of Lords. I mean, it was New Labour kind of said, "Oh, we got to get rid of all those hereditary peers and all those dukes and earls and all those you know characters who were sitting on that lord's benches just because their ancestors hundreds of years ago, were, raping and pillaging the villages, hanging sheep thieves and whatever, and they get to sit on the House of Lords. They get to set uh, shape policy. So we're going to get rid of all that, and we're not going to have these hereditary peers sitting on the Lord's benches. We're going to have life peers, people appointed by prime ministers. Well, of course, anyone could have told Blair that, well, that's going to be a ripe for corruption, ripe for patronage, because everyone was going to want to become a life peer, and therefore this is just something, a nice perk that prime ministers are going to be throwing around, making life peers, and so the people who are going to be there on the benches in the House of Lords, and they would serve forever, would be completely unaccountable. The only reason they're on the benches in the House of Lords is that they gave money. That's always a good reason. They gave money to the political parties, so that gets you a life peerage. You never have to face an election, and or you were part of the patronage system, and so that's how they shoved Mandelson onto the House of Lords. And of course, Mandelson did what you would expect him to do. He used it completely corruptly to advance his financial agenda, and that's the truth of everyone who was on that life peerage gravy train. So it's got much worse. At least in the days of those dukes and earls on the House of Lords, they had a certain integrity. Of course, they were unelected, but they actually took what they were doing seriously. They would become experts in certain fields. Agriculture and whatever. You have these hereditary peers who would give very interesting and informed speeches about problems of farming. You don't have anything like that. These people who are now sitting on the House of Lords benches, they're just trying to cash in, and the politicians who put them there are trying to cash in. So anyway, Summer Petros goes on. The main dispute concerned the vetting procedure. Mandelson, as he's now called, he's lost his lord, so he's now lord. Underwent prior to his appointment as a British ambassador in Washington. Apparently, he was asked a few light ball questions by our prime minister, and he lied. He lied. I love this. He lied. And that's what Starmer says. Or he lied to me. Well, what did you expect? I mean, it's like this is a guy who had to resign twice from the government, twice in disgrace. I mean, it wasn't just there was some policy clash or whatever. No, he resigned in disgrace. He resigned because he lied, and he resigned because he was lining his pocket. So the idea that you were expecting him to give you truthful answers, kind of ridiculous. But that's what Starmer was insisting. Well, he lied to me. Well, yeah. I mean, I'd be surprised if he didn't lie to you. That would be the shock. Apparently, he was asked a few libel questions by our prime minister, and he lied. No other checks or cross references were needed, and he was fast tracked. I'm beginning to think the forensics cross examining skills of our legally trained prime minister aren't what they are cracked up to be. That's a very good point. Exactly. This is a man who was the chief prosecutor. He was the chief prosecutor in the United Kingdom. So he was right at the very top of the prosecutorial profession, and so you would expect he'd be the highest forensic cross-examining skills. Apparently, It wasn't. But as I was said, I mean, I never thought he was a very good lawyer. I think he just knew how to brown nose his way to the top. And prosecutors are generally not the best of lawyers because essentially they don't have to be good lawyers. Um, Most prosecutions are successful, partly because, of course, most of the people who are prosecuted are indeed guilty of the crimes they're charged. But prosecutors don't prosecute cases that they think they might not win. I mean, so anyone who has money, who's going to hire good lawyers, and where it's going to be up in the air as to will who's going to win this, they don't take those cases. They only essentially take the cases that they know they're going to win, and that's why prosecutors have whatever 98% or 99% success rate. So you don't have to be a good lawyer to get to the top of the prosecutorial system. And I think Starmer is not a good lawyer. You're right. He didn't show himself to be the most astute of cross examiners. And then Summer Petros goes on. It was also suggested conspiratorially that Epstein worked for the Russians. Oh yeah. Well, we'll had all that. This just isn't going to work. No one will take this in. Why only now has this become known? Much more likely is that maybe that in 6 months Mandelson will roll up in Moscow as a lifelong NKVD plant leaps across the stage, following a build-up speech by Putin. No, I quite agree. I think that this one really is it's not going to fly, the Russia thing, but one shouldn't wholly um, underestimate the influence of these stories because there are interests that want to keep the story going. I mean, we have Donald Tusk, the unspeakable Polish prime minister. I mean, a truly disgusting human being. He's peddling this story that Epstein was working for Putin. Well, that's what you would expect from him. So there will be people peddling this, and the Epstein story isn't going to go away anytime. Even in the distant future, it's going to be going on for many, many years. It's much as RussiaGate will never disappear. There's still a large, decisive proportion of Democrats who believe that Trump is working for Putin. I mean, anytime you look on X, you will find I don't know how many tweets um, suggesting that Trump is working for Putin. So that's just going to continue. That's not going to end. So yeah, I think that's going to go on. Now, I think Mandelson will not be prosecuted. I think, and if he's not going to be prosecuted, then he will absolutely make a comeback into public life. You know, that you always have that in Britain. Once you've disgraced yourself, and as long as you're not prosecuted, even then, or even if you are prosecuted, there's always something for you to do. There's always some TV show that you can take part in, some interviews you can enjoy, um, and Mandelson has a certain charm and a sort of debonair quality to him. So I think he'll be back. Not in any political way. I think that's gone. There'll be other things that he's going to do. Anyway, thank you so much. And here is Marty. Always introduces himself. Now, is I have this Marty with this really interesting picture. This is, I guess, Annalena Baerbock. You can't exactly tell from the picture. This is Annalena Baerbock who's blowing bubbles. Hmm. Um. That's an that's an interesting this interesting photograph. That's I don't know when I wonder when was this photograph taken. I'm assuming this photograph was taken a little while ago. That was, but it's an interesting photo. Um, so, so blowing bubbles. when does her term in at the UN General Assembly come to an end? So, and what is she going to do then? Does she return to Germany? So, or does she hang out in New York? I suspect she's going to hang out in New York. I think probably she's rather enjoys the New York life. I'm not sure she wants to go back to the dreariness of German politics. So, I can see, probably having nice parties, meeting all sorts of glamorous, fashionable people. So I think she may stay in New York. Anyway, Rob, thank you so much, Marty. As always, always good to see these pictures. And then Robert, thank you so much, Robert, for your generosity. And Robert says, couldn't you argue that Breakfast at Tiffany's hints at the same social ecosystem Epstein operated in? Ultra wealthy men, young women navigating elite circles, and a hazy boundary between glamour, patronage, and exploitation. Holly Golightly's world of parties, benefactors, and rats and super rats feels like a romanticized precursor to the darker power network scandals that later shocked the public. I think that's very astute and incisive, because if you recall the those parties, it was very much a mixture of people. You had these um, fashionable people, the people who were kind of glamorous, well, world of fashion magazines. You had filmmakers, lawyers, international businessmen, and so and therefore, and with it, how did you move? How does this world move? The the lubricant of this world is having a lot of very attractive women who are kind of passed around. That's this, and that's how Holly Golightly lived. She passed. She moved around among very rich men. Sometimes there was like that guy, this very wealthy Brazilian. Sometimes he was a gangster. There was also part of that social world. And she was performing various tasks for this gangster. And so, in a way, it is, I think, quite analogous to what Epstein was doing. I mean, he was an impresario. He brought together all these various people, very different, and I think they rather enjoyed the fact that, hey, well, you never know who you're going to meet at a Jeffrey Epstein party. They say, okay, was it going to be some left-wing intellectuals? Is it going to be somebody who works at the World Bank? Is it, going to be Chomsky meets Yehud Barak? It was a potpourri of people. So, they said, hey, these are all influential figures. And you can see Woody Allen would get ideas for films through these kinds of parties. Um, Now, as I said earlier, I'm sure that intelligence agencies, all kinds of intelligence agencies, knowing what Jeffrey Epstein was doing, would want to talk to him. Find out what's going on. What deals are being cooked up in Wall Street. What's going on in the administration. And so, if you want to gather information, that's how you gather information. It's Jeffrey Epstein that would provide you with the insider dope. Um, so I think that analogy is is great, and it is strange that everyone is so surprised that this went on. I would have thought, yeah, that's exactly what going on. Yeah, I'm sure that's what it is. There are all these parties, you know, to which we are not invited, but but rich and famous people are invited, and there are people such as Jeffrey Epstein whose entire lives are devoted to continually, um, mixing with the famous and the important. I knew people like that in New York. That's what they cared most about. I've snagged this Wall Street big shot for lunch. Oh, I'm going to a cocktail party at some at some hostess's pad on the Upper East Side. Oh, I'm having dinner with some uh, second rank movie star, but there'll be a reporter from the New York Times there. This is how they live. And Jeffrey Epstein, was better at it than others. I think he had more money to play with than others, and he was quite generous with his money. I mean, there's no question. I mean, that's the striking thing about him. He was very generous. Not everybody's so generous with money. He was very generous, and he also figured out, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure it out, that you need lots and lots of beautiful young women to keep this whole social work on the road. And as Robert says, it's kind of the way Breakfast at Tiffany's worked out. That how did Holly Golightly um, survive? Well, that's how she survives. I mean, there was always some rich man, that's the kindness of strangers, and Fred himself. That's the um, with Fred himself, and he was gay, and so that's another part of it. That there are also rich gay guys on the lookout for good-looking young men. So anyway, thank you so much, Robert, and Cynthia. Always good to see you, Cynthia. And as I always introduce Cynthia as a resident film critic, analyst, encyclopedist, film scholar, who graces our pages with her extremely knowledgeable and incisive observations and comments and criticisms of films, and particularly the films that we screen every Monday and that are posted on our locals board. And so we had one of the classics of the noir genre on Monday, Double Indemnity. So please go to the locals board, watch Double Indemnity, read Cynthia's many and really you know clever and knowledgeable observations about the film. So read that, and so you can get a full enjoyment of the Double Indemnity, get a real all-round experience of the film noir genre. And of course, Cynthia is a valued member of our board, always has very interesting comments to make. But before we address Cynthia's comment, we now have the poll for next week's film up, and the poll is about the bourgeois life and its discontents. So I've chose 8 films, and so please vote, and so that we can decide what we'll screen next Monday. So at the moment, John Frankenheimer's Seconds is leading, but not by much. So people vote, and then you could absolutely reshuffle the deck as to which film is ahead. But Frankenheimer's Seconds was an interesting film. It's one of the few, a few kind of non-comedies that Rock Hudson made. But this goes beyond just a drama. I mean, this is quite a sinister, creepy film. So it's a good film. But anyway, whether you like it or not, please go to our locals board and vote for what film should be screened next Monday. Anyway, now to Cynthia's question. Cynthia says, many agree Epstein was an Israeli asset and Jewish supremacist. Some, including Kevork Marcian, now make similar claims about Chomsky. They cite his ties to Ehud Barak, his wish to live on the kibbutz built on seized Palestinian land, his tenure at Pentagon-funded MIT, his ridicule of 9/11 insider jobs claims, his criticism of Mearsheimer and Wolf for being too hard on Israel, Israel's absence from manufacturing consent. Was Israel absent from that? I'm not. I'm not. Um, well, I'd have to look up whether it was absent. But anyway, I'll continue reading this. Israel's absence from manufacturing consent, and his support for the Israeli-backed Kurdish SDF scheme to break up Syria, and it goes on. Seen in this light, um, Epstein's operation looks far broader than sex scandals alone. Financial crimes, secret networks, business entanglements, and political favors, far more versatile levers of control, yet they remain large and examined. If Epstein was an intelligence asset, how far did that leverage extend? Could figures like Trump be compromised not only by sexual compromise, but by hidden pressure from Mossad or other unforeseen forces? All right, let's sort of there's a lot there. I don't accept these criticism of Chomsky. I think Chomsky wrote probably one of the harshest books ever on Israel. I mean, I think it was called The Fateful Triangle: Israel, the United States, and I forgot what the part of it, but that was The Fateful Triangle. It was a very, very, very critical book on Israel. So he wrote that around 1984. It was mostly focused on the Israel's invasion of Lebanon, and he really, I mean, that was fairly unremitting, just about the crimes that Israel had committed, the act of creation of the state of Israel, which itself was obviously a crime and the dispossession of a people. So he was pretty unremitting in that. So I can't remember with the manufacturing consent. The manufacturing consent, if Israel is not mentioned in that, and I'd have to look that up as to whether it was, but manufacturing consent was mostly focused on the United States foreign policy. So, but I would think that he would certainly mention the United States involvement in the Middle East. Now, he did have a very peculiar take on Israel, and I think the reason why he objected to Walton Mearsheimer's book, and I think Chomsky was wrong there, and I think Walton Mearsheimer were right, was that Chomsky believed that Israel was serving U.S. interests, and that Israel was really the cat's paw of the United States. So because if you look at it, the common sense would suggest, well, that United States is much stronger than Israel. It's a huge country. It's a giant nuclear superpower, economic, financial power, military power. Of course, the United States gets to tell Israel what to do. Of course, Israel serves U.S. interests, and that was the argument Chomsky used in The Fateful Triangle. But generally, it says no, it's the United States that sets policy, and Israel just simply implements U.S. policy. Now, Walt and Mearsheimer say no. It's the Israel lobby. Israel gets to set policy, and Israel, through its manipulation of American politicians, American public life, gets America to fight its wars for it. Gets America to do its bidding. So that was a sharp division, and I think Walt and Mearsheimer are right, because it's hard to see exactly what Israel does for the United States, how Israel in any way benefits the United States, what Israel, what United States gets out of Israel. So therefore, when we look at even just look at the crisis now with Iran, this is Israel's war against Iran. There's no reason why United States and Iran should be at war with each other. I mean, whatever we want to say is about Khomeini and everything else in '79, that's ancient history. It's clearly, United States and Iran can absolutely work out a amicable relationship. It's Israel that's driving this policy, and that's exactly true. I think Walter and Mearsheimer were right about that, but Chomsky was not. The 9/11 insider job claims, well, I mean, they haven't been proven. I mean, that it was an insider job. I mean, you can, I mean, I mean, you can't just simply say, "Oh, it was an insider job," and then not come up with any evidence that it was an insider job. So, I think that's a little unfair to criticize him for that. Um, but the he did spend some time on the kibbutz. However, he has been, nothing if not very critical of Israel. I mean, I mean, to suggest that somehow he and Yehud Barak are on the same page would be, I mean, if that's the case, then Chomsky has obviously had a complete change of heart, because that hasn't been the case throughout his career. Um, yeah, I mean, the money came from the Pentagon. I mean, what's new about that? All universities in the United States get huge amounts of money from the Pentagon, and MIT, which really was pioneered, computers, computer science. Back in the day, it was the mainframe computers, and then of course, personal computers and whatnot. I mean, of course, it got huge amounts of money from the Pentagon. That had nothing to do with Chomsky. I mean, that was the um, that's how the computer industry was born in the United States. It was financed by the Pentagon. The internet was also all financed by the Pentagon. So I don't think that's very significant. I mean, that was just that was a key source of money for the MIT, for Harvard, for almost all um, American universities. Stanford, they all get huge amounts of money from the Pentagon and from other U.S. government agencies. I mean, whether it's from the National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation, and this that's how they make a living. That's the government, lavish government funding. So I don't think that's entirely fair on Chomsky. So I said that the part that I think he was wrong about the Israel lobby. I think the Israel lobby shows, yeah, it's Israel that prevails in Washington. Why that happens, that's an interesting question. But I don't think it's true that Israel, as Chomsky argued, I think Chomsky is wrong about that. That Israel was somehow the United States cat's paw. That it was somehow. Um, so his support for the Israeli-backed Kurdish SDF scheme to break up Syria. I didn't know that he supported that. I mean, that's what he, Kevork says. I don't know, but I hadn't I hadn't. I mean, it's possible. It's possible. I'm just I don't know. Thinking aloud now. Maybe he did. He has some sympathy for the Kurds. I mean, he has a lot of this Chomsky kind of boring leftish views that somehow the Kurds, some great wrongs was committed against the Kurds, and so maybe that's part of his general familiar denunciation of Western imperialism. Oh, the Western imperialists, they used the Kurds and then they betrayed them. I mean, we've been hearing this for decades about how the Kurds have been betrayed by the Western imperialists. So maybe Chomsky just embraced that. Well, yeah. Look, we don't know about these crimes. I mean, to be honest, I mean, we're talking about all these crimes that were supposedly committed by Epstein, the people in the Epstein circle. We don't know. We know what he pleaded guilty to back in Florida. We know from his lawyers that Epstein really didn't want to plead guilty to any of that. Epstein wanted to. He thought that I mean, he didn't think that he should plead guilty to anything. He thought that he could actually fight this case in the courts. I think it was lawyers, including Dershowitz, who urged him to accept this plea deal. So that was pretty much the sum and substance that we know about these crimes, what he pleaded guilty to in Florida. But all the rest about these financial crimes, we don't know. all we've got these document dumps, huge document dumps. Lots of names mentioned, and um, obviously he had a very wide array of acquaintances. He lived quite a long life. He devoted himself to cultivating lots and lots of acquaintances. So that generated a lot of emails. So all these emails have now been published, which I think is incidentally quite quite unfair to people. I mean, I don't know whether any of us would really appreciate all our emails over many years just simply dumped out there, and then everybody can just read all the things we'd said and joked about and whatever. I don't know. I'm sure there'll be things there that we'd find embarrassing, but it's all been dumped there without any real concern for people's privacy rights, or or that the fact that they're being made to look bad without actually having done anything necessarily bad. But everyone said, "Oh, fantastic! That's just let's dump everything out there." But in terms of whether any wrongdoing has been proven, I don't really see it. I mean, because about Trump. Okay, well, what have you got on Trump? Um, I, the only thing we had on Trump was this ridiculous porn star who claimed that she'd had sex with him. That story was I didn't believe it at all. And in that case, in any case, um, Trump was the victim of an extortion scheme by this model of probity. Whatever her name was, the that porn star, and so it's easy to say, oh, these crimes have been committed, but we don't really know whether they have been. I mean, we've got the Mandelson thing. Well, we'll see whether he committed any crimes in passing some information on. Um, but otherwise, it's just yeah, a lot of rich people um, hanging around together and conveying gossip to one another, and that's part of how that world works. It works through gossip and people feeling themselves to be important because they are the purveyors of gossip, and they hear gossip that others don't hear. Um, so anyway, that's that my view, my take on that. Not sure anyone would agree with me, but I just haven't seen any proof of all these wild theories. I'm ready to accept them. If somebody wants to show me that here's the evidence for the theory, I hold no beef. I'm ready to accept them. I just haven't seen it. All I've seen is something that I would always expected to see, that Larry Summers and Alan Dershowitz and Yehud Barak and the rest hung out. Trump didn't, incidentally. I mean, Trump kind of broke with this circle back in 2004 or whatever, which I think is also interesting because that someone as ambitious, as obviously ambitious as Trump was, um, cut connections with Epstein would suggest that Trump realized fairly early on that this actually isn't going anywhere good, and it didn't think that Epstein would be useful to his advance. And I think you'd have to think Trump was always thinking about you know not just the next step, but thinking about the presidency. So if he decided in 2004 that Jeffrey Epstein wasn't worth cultivating, well, that tells you something. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And Richard Phillips says, I admire you are prepared to be counter narrative on numerous occasions. The abuse of the word genocide. Now, Epstein, where are we? I lost that. Where was I now? Where are we? I had it a moment ago. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Justine, now Epstein. Most influencers say he ran a PDF ring, which is PDF. That's not bad. Like a pedophile ring for Mossad. People seem to have forgotten he was a finance expert, probably one with no ethics. That's a good reason for elites to get to know him. Yeah, I think so. He had to have had talent in that way. I mean, that he could make money for people, or he would know how to skirt the law for people. I mean, you have to be talented to do that. I mean, he didn't have any formal training. He had no business training, he had no legal training, he had no accountancy training. I don't think he even had a university degree. So to be able to handle huge sums of money for people who had huge sums of money, then you'd have to say he was talented. And if you have talent, people also think that, well, he's worth knowing if I think he's going to make money for me. And that's always, I mean, if you have money, you always have to think about, well, how do I make more money? How do I ensure that I'm not going to lose this money, and that I will have more money next year than I have this year? And if Jeffrey Epstein would know how to make, whatever proper investments, how he can uh, get you off, certain tax liabilities, then, well, it would make sense that people would want to hang out with him and seek out his financial expertise. Um, I think he's probably one with no ethics. That's a good reason for elites to get to know him. He was a degenerate for sure and into young women. But sex trafficking kids is a major crime. I doubt he would have got away with it for long if it was large numbers. I agree, and I think from what we know, what he did in Florida. I mean, these young women. I mean, they did lie to him about their age. I mean, so it's not like, well, he was seeking out these very very young girls who were underage. I mean, they were actually, these young girls wanted to be a part of his orbit, and to get into his orbit, they actually lied about their age. Now, legally, that's not a defense to say, oh, well, she lied about her age, but nonetheless, that reflects that he wasn't actually seeking out underage girls. I mean, it was just these girls were telling him, well, yeah, no, I'm above the age of consent. So, even though they weren't. So I don't think he was doing this this whole pedophile ring, for which again there's no evidence. I mean, that story, the big story that all these rich guys, the world's richest guys, were getting together with these and holding these parties with enjoying sexual favors of children, and then he would somehow blackmail them. The quite why that would be a good idea, if you want to have rich friends, why you want to blackmail your rich friends, because that's the quickest way to lose friends, if you start blackmailing them. For that it's a very lurid story, but that no evidence has come forward for any of that. What we do know is he liked to have these massages. I don't know why, but that was his thing. These constant massages, and some of them were very young. But as I've said before, it just so happens that the age of consent in Florida is quite high. So yes, they were underage in Florida, where the age of consent is 17, so they were 16. That's not really pedophilia, because 15, 16 was absolutely is above the age of consent in most of Europe, even if it isn't in Florida. So it isn't really the pedophile. I mean, that's not a defense of Epstein. I mean, I kind of, yeah, he's a disgusting person. I don't, I hold no truck for him. I mean, he is disgusting in every way. But on the other hand, I don't think there's any reason for getting hysterical about it either. And it's kind of, yeah, what you would expect rich people to be to be doing, and the pedophilia really has to, people have to get a grip on themselves and try to get a have an understanding of what pedophilia is. And I don't think people know what pedophilia is, and so they just throw this around, which is an absolutely incendiary, toxic allegation, but whereas it really isn't true. This isn't pedophilia. Um, Anyway, thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. And Annalena Golightly, Robert asked Annalena Golightly with that picture. I have to say, um, she looks quite sexy in that photograph. I don't know who took that photograph or when it was taken, but it's a good picture. It's a good photo. I don't know where Marty has a knack of finding these amazing photographs. So that's I like that. And then here's Nixon and Brezhnev, also Marty, and that this is I think from 1973 when I think then they started joking around that Brezhnev didn't want to drink from his glass because he thought Nixon might try to poison him. And so they kind of waited who was going to drink first. So Nixon had to drink first just to reassure Brezhnev that his glass hadn't been poisoned. So I think I think that's what happened in that photograph. Um, and um, and then here is um, another great picture from Marty. This is Stubb, a good friend, Alexander Stubb of Finland, and next to him is a good friend, Kaya Kallas. And yes, and they're looking up at a shooting star. Oh, it seems to be coming closer. Yes. Um, yeah, that's right. Anyway, so thank you so much, Marty. Always great. All these memes. It's always amazing where you get these pictures. Anyway, Aristotle one, thank you very much. He says, so Les Wexner and Leon Black paid Epstein about $500 million in fees. How do you explain this? Black and Wexner are Jewish oligarchs, part of the mega group lobbying for Israel, along with the Bronfman family, Lauders, etc. The obvious assumption would be to say that Epstein is a front operation for the Israel lobbies, or how do you how do how do you I missed that front row or how else do you explain this? Do you think Jewish oligarchs are super generous to random grifters? Can I hold out any hope, George? Well, I mean that's a good question. That's how he that you had, but you could also just as easily turn it around for what you just asked. Why does the Israel lobby need him? I mean, the Israel lobby is so powerful, has so much money at his disposal. It has such sway in Congress. I mean, just about everybody in Congress is on the Israel lobby payroll. What do they need Epstein for? I mean, I mean, if you can buy up politicians by the cartload, and you can sway the White House and the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor, all of the things that I think we can agree the Israel lobby can do. What do they need Jeffrey Epstein for? I mean, the idea that he's some sort of, how is he a conduit to the House of Representatives or the Senate or anything else? I mean, he's just some schlemiel in New York, brown nosing with every rich, powerful person that he knows. All the people he can run into living on the Upper East Side. So why does the Israel lobby need him? Now, then going back to this Les Wexner and Leon Black, why would they pay him? Well, it may just be that he was just very good at what he did. Now, why he was so good, I don't know. But that's kind of how he made his money. Um, I don't really understand that either. But I don't get the why the Israel lobby needs him. Just like why does Yehud Barak need him particularly? Yehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister, he can get to much more important people than Epstein. I mean, he could get to Bill Clinton. I mean, he was good buddies with Bill Clinton. He was buddies with all the people within the Clinton administration, all those Robert Rubin, Larry Summers. What do they need Epstein for? So that's why I just get I can't buy into the idea that Epstein is the center of the universe, because he really isn't. He's just some rich schlemiel in New York. He's not. These powerful people don't need him. Robert Rubin does not need Jeffrey Epstein. Robert Rubin, I mean, he is a former Treasury Secretary. He doesn't need some guy who knows how to arrange financial packages, or real estate plans, or or whatever it was that he did for Les Wexner and Leon Black. So those people. Now you're right about Bronfman and Lauder and everyone else. Yeah, they are absolutely absolute Israel firsters. They're fanatical supporters of Israel and everything else. But then again, I'd have to say, what do they need him for? We already know about Ron Lauder. I mean, this guy has been a bankroller for Israel since forever. And he's got all that Estee Lauder fortune. Bronfman, he's got all that alcohol money. That's serious money that they have at their disposal. Much more so than Jeffrey Epstein, because Jeffrey Epstein certainly had money, but comparatively modest amounts of money. I mean, whatever it was 700 million or so. No, that obviously is a lot of money, but nothing like the kind of sums that Ron Lauder commands, Bronfman commands, or even Wexner or Black commands. I mean, those are sort of billionaires. Bill Gates. I mean, huge sums of money. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein doesn't even remotely come close to the kinds of money that Bill Gates has. So that's still the case. What does he what does he do for them? Well, he may well have been just very clever at these at freeing people from their tax liabilities. I mean, he had a talent for that. And he was an impresario. He knew how to bring people together and have these great parties. That's a talent, not a particularly impressive talent. But but then you have to say, what is it that all these people saw in him? Like it's not like Andrew, Prince Andrew. And Prince Andrew could care less about Israel. He's not interested in Israel. I don't think I think Mandelson's particularly interested in Israel. Mandelson's he was interested in money. He liked to have money. He liked to live the good life. Live high on the hog. And Epstein facilitated that. And I think that's true with Andrew. What did Andrew like? Andrew liked lots of buxom babes. That's what he liked. He would like buxom babes and good parties. And that's what Epstein provided for him: buxom babes and parties. There's nothing about Israel there. And hey, then he has the kudos in New York. Hey, I get Prince Andrew to stay at my house. And Prince Andrew likes to stay at his house because there are lots of hot babes at his house. So anyway, thank you so much, Aristotle. And he says, like him or loathe him. Fuentes articulates an interesting take on Epstein, and then it says, okay, well, I'll take a look at that. I have difficulties with Fuentes. I guess I don't know. I mean, I know some people love listening to him. I have to grit my teeth to listen to him. But okay. Um, and then Robert says, I agree that arms control treaties are not in themselves decisive in case of first strike risk. However, the problem of the mineshaft gap is another matter entirely. Yes, yes, Mr. President, we must not allow the emergence of a mineshaft gap. That's the last line of the film. So the mineshaft gap. Yeah. Um, Richard Phillips says, as I used to follow MAGA commentary, they hate Rubio, despise him. Yeah, they'll never warm to him, and particularly as the policy that he's been pursuing and seems to have had some success in inflicting on Trump. I think MAGA will absolutely not forgive him for that. Richard Phillips says the current lords are a little better than street trash. I absolutely agree with you, and I think that Mandelson is very typical of the kind of lords that now sit on the benches. So I mean, I think it was better. I mean, obviously, the old system had many flaws, but those dukes and earls, they had a certain integrity, and not all of them, but they had a certain integrity. I mean, I think they took their responsibilities quite seriously. They would really go out of their way to make thoughtful, intelligent contributions to policy debates. They would know a great deal. When you get to debates about, say, hunting, they would know a lot about hunting. They would know a lot about farming. So if you want to have pass good legislation about farming, then you want to go and listen to these hereditary peers because they knew something about farming. But these people, they're just peddlers. They're just they're street trash, like Mandelson. How do I get as much money as possible and quickly? $75,000 he supposedly got from Epstein. That's nice. Anyway, NKMRD says Israel is very prominent and dominant in the media, but not the only player that tries to entangle the US into things. The entire lobby is more than just Israel and some arms manufacturers. I do not believe that ex empires suddenly just start playing Sudoku and knitting socks and be happy. The story about the star of the movie, Desert Stormy. Stormy Daniels. That's the one. That's the porn star. Her name escaped me. I usually remember her name, but this time her name escaped me. Stormy Daniels, who I think, well, as I say, I mean, she she was just running an extortion racket. I mean, well, what do you expect? I mean, it's like expecting high morals from a porn star. Stormy Daniels is indeed interesting in all this. It was a money who actually tried to betray a deal she made from Trump, from what I read, and Trump did not deal with the situation in the most severe way a powerful person could, maybe due to morals, due to fear of prosecution, shame, or calculation. Who knows? Some may say Trump carries hope for random goodness more than sanity and justice. It was always very odd that he had that deal with Stormy Daniels. He really didn't need to do any kind of a deal with her because nothing that she said or she alleged in 2016 was new because she'd already made told that story, I think, in 2011. So it had already been out in the in the public space years earlier about Trump. And so she wasn't really saying anything new. But then somehow, because it was close to the election, he was persuaded by Michael Cohen, and I think Cohen and Stormy Daniels, I think, cooked up this scheme together of how to extract money from Trump. And I think Trump at that stage, maybe because it was so close to the election, was afraid that she could damage him, and that's why they paid her off. But the strange thing is that, I mean, if you're going to pay somebody off, then the quid pro quo is that you keep your mouth shut. That's what that's the whole point of this of a deal like that. You pay hush money. Well, then you have to stay hush. I mean, you can't just go blabbing about this. So he paid the money. He didn't get anything for it. because she still blabbed about the story, even though she supposedly had signed this agreement, the non-disclosure agreement, about it. Um, but in itself, the story is so stupid because who the hell cares? I mean, as I said before, I don't actually believe her story because I don't think porn stars are what Trump is interested in. It's just, he may not be the classiest of people, but he kind of like classy women. I think that if you look at his wives, Ivana, and then the Georgia Peach, and then Melania, they're kind of classy women. I think that's what he likes. He's a germaphobe. A porn star is just not his thing. So I never really believed her story. But either way, you pay hush money not because somebody's telling the truth. You just want this whole thing to go away. But the point of the thing is going back to the issue that is there a kind of a compromat on Trump? Well, the man is 78 years old. I mean, if there was really some skeletons in the cupboard, then I think we'd have heard about it by now. And he raped a 13-year-old, all the various lurid allegations that have been made about him. We'd have known about it, but we don't. So I'm skeptical that there's somewhere or other, there's an allegation that Trump did something horrific, and it's just gathering dust somewhere, and then finally it'll we will learn the truth. I just just like with Russiagate, one day we will find that the document in which Putin says to Trump, "Yeah, I will steal the U.S. election for you, Donald." Uh, it's not going to happen. Anyway, so thank you very much, everybody who joined me. Thank you for all of your comments and questions, and thank you above all to those who contributed to the tip jar. The dogs are asleep. They won't be asleep for much longer, and they will be checking the tip jar. And then, the moment they've done that, they will go back to their familiar routine of complaining about me and my own inadequacies. But that's who they are. So anyway, thank you very much, everybody who contributed to the tip jar. Thank you for joining me. We're going to have some more podcasts over the weekend, and then we can hope that next Monday we'll be able to do the live stream with Peter at 10 a.m. Eastern time, and then it'll be time for my solo Tuesday, 3 p.m. I hope to see you all then. Until then, all the best. Good night. Bye bye.